Hey everyone, are you ready to travel back in time? Not to live like a king, nor to ride around in shining armor, but to experience a world where the law didn't protect you. It punished, and sometimes it punished just because it could. Today we are going to dive into the most absurd, cruel, and very real laws of the Middle Ages, a time when sneezing could become a sentence, where smiling at the wrong moment cost you dearly, and where owning a black cat was considered a pact with the devil. But relax, you won't need to appear at any courthouse today. Just listen and hopefully fall asleep before the part where they rip out tongues as punishment for gossip. So settle in, find a comfortable position, let my voice act as your mental pillow, and before sleep drags you into the dungeon of unconsciousness like this video. Subscribe to the channel. There is always a new story, equally unnecessary, waiting for you. And comment what time it is where you are right now. I like knowing who else is trying to sleep with penal content. Lights out, let's talk about medieval justice, or what they call justice. You wake up itching, of course. There is always an itch. You don't know if it was the hay, the lice, or the regret of being alive in 1324. The only certainty is that the day has started, and it started wrong, because in the Middle Ages, opening your eyes could already be considered a provocation. Your house, or rather the room of warped wood you share with 6 people, a pig, and an undefined smell, is still dark. But outside, medieval life has already begun banging pots. Literally, the lady who lives next door and has been screaming since 1247 is already cooking a mixture of turnips and rage. You try to get up without making noise, not out of respect for your straw colleagues, but because the floorboards groan more than you do on nights when the cold enters your soul. And if you make too much noise, well, your cousin might accuse you of witchcraft, simple as that. Is this a problem? Of course it is, but it's also just Tuesday. While you stretch, or try to, since your body is locked up like an old gate, you realize something is wrong. The pig isn't in the straw and the chicken has vanished again. They probably fled together, not for romance, but for survival. You don't even have time to digest this emotional loss when you hear the church bells. They ring with the subtlety of a falling anvil. It is the official sound that you are late. Late for what? For everything. The first unwritten rule of the Middle Ages is that you are always in debt to someone, to the feudal lord, to the church, to biology itself. And today, for example, you have to attend your neighbor's trial. The charge: sneezed 3 times in a row and harvested fennel without a permit, in the middle of a holy month. You put on your tunic, the only one you own, still wet from the rain the day before yesterday. It smells like a scared dog. But it's what you have. You leave the house, step in the mud, slip slightly on what appears to be human manure, or non-human, hard to say, and walk toward the village center. On the way, you remember another rule. Looking a guard in the eyes can be interpreted as a challenge. So you lower your gaze, not out of humility, but out of an instinct for dental preservation. Arriving at the square, the atmosphere is an event. People gathered, children playing with the local rats, and the executioner already sharpening his sword with the tranquility of someone who does this every week. Spoiler, he does. You find a discreet little spot to watch. After all, no one wants to draw attention at a medieval trial. The problem is that just being present is dangerous in itself. Someone might point at you and say, "He also picked fennel." And just like that, another one in the defendant's box. The judge appears. It isn't a judge in a robe with a gavel. It's the local priest with beer breath and a notebook where he notes down sins with drawings. He begins the trial with the standard phrase, "May God enlighten us or punish us, depending on the divine mood today." The neighbor is dragged to the center of the square. She cries. The priest asks if she confesses. She says yes, but that it was an involuntary sneeze. He notes down nasal rebellion. The crowd murmurs. The sentence, 3 days of fasting, a forced bath in the frozen fountain, and carrying a rock on her back in a procession to the end of the village. Official motive, atonement for disturbing the harmony of the harvest. Real motive, someone needed to be punished today. As she is escorted out by the guards, you think, at least she wasn't decapitated, and immediately regret it, because thinking out loud could also be interpreted as witchcraft. So you fake a cough, but only once. Who knows if twice is already a crime too? You go back home hungry, of course, and with an existential doubt. How many of these laws are real? The short answer is many. The long answer is more than it would be comfortable to know. In the Middle Ages, almost anything could be a crime. Sneezing, walking with clothes of another color, laughing at a wake, singing at the wrong hours, looking too much at the moon, having a black cat, eating while fasting, not eating while fasting, breathing forcefully in holy places, and perhaps the worst of all, not paying taxes. That indeed was unforgivable. But relax, we are going to get into these absurd laws little by little, very slowly, because there is still a lot of medieval misery ahead, and curiously, you are still awake. So settle in, breathe deep, and take advantage of the fact that for now, the biggest risk is sleeping on your side and drooling on the pillow, which, by the way, would be considered heresy in certain monasteries. You are back home, or back to the pile of planks and fungus where you try to survive. The neighbor's trial still echoes in your head. And while you chew on a hard bread that defies physics, you start to remember other laws you've seen around. And none of them seem to have been written by someone with a peaceful sleep, because in the Middle Ages, the rule was simple. If it takes work to think, punish. If it seems like a sin, punish. If it's Tuesday, punish again. Let's start with something light. The law of night silence. In certain villages, if you were caught outside your house after curfew, you could be fined, beaten, or accused of witchcraft, because clearly only wizards would need to go out to pee at 10 at night. And if you snored too loudly, officially it wasn't a crime, but it could be interpreted as interference with collective rest, which, depending on the priest's mood, earned penance. Sleeping was already bad. Sleeping with the fear of sleeping was even better. Now imagine you have a donkey. Congratulations. This is basically a rural BMW. Except if the donkey decided to walk on someone else's land, guess what? Fine. It didn't matter if he was attracted by the smell of cabbage or by a spiritual calling. The responsibility was yours. And in some more creative villages, the donkey was also judged literally with the right to a lawyer and everything. Yes, trials of animals existed. Pigs, cows, even chickens. Once a rooster was condemned for laying an egg, because that defied God's natural laws and smelled of a demonic pact. The egg was crushed, the rooster hanged. No joke here. Did this really happen? And you thinking your boss is annoying? But it wasn't just nature that was at risk. Love could also be a crime. Do you remember the girl from the neighboring village? The one who smiled at you at the harvest festival? That's right. If you exchanged too many glances, you could be accused of lechery. And if someone said they saw you talking behind the barn, boom, tribunal. In the Middle Ages, the word of a witness was worth gold or death, depending on whom they were accusing. If it was a good person accusing a peasant, well, let's just say the scales of medieval justice were very selective and rusty. Now imagine this. You step onto a dirt road. So far so good, but the road is maintained by the feudal lord who demands a toll for stepping. This existed. In some kingdoms, passing on foot through certain lands required payment, even if it was just mud, even if you were just fleeing the plague. Ah, the plague. If you survived it, congratulations. You still had to deal with the law of spiritual cleanliness. This meant attending Mass, not questioning the sermon, not sleeping during the Gregorian chant, and mind you, not yawning. Yawning in church was considered a sign of possession. In at least 3 different kingdoms, this earned a light exorcism or a slap on the neck, depending on the parish. But let's say you were a bit more bold. You decided to make a joke with the priest, just a light jest, like calling the host a holy cookie. Done. Heresy. Heresy was the joker card of accusations. It worked for everything. Questioned the price of the tithe? Heresy. Asked why only the priest had shoes? Heresy. Thought it was weird the monk's cat spoke Latin? Triple heresy. And if you were accused of heresy, you entered the favorite game of the era, prove you are innocent. Except the proof generally involved boiling water, coals, or carrying a wooden cross while people threw stones, all very symbolic and traumatizing. Now, if you were a woman, the laws gained a special seasoning, punishment with built-in misogyny. An example, the scold's bridle, an instrument of torture used to punish women who spoke too much. It was literally an iron gag with internal spikes, because nothing says social control like a piece of metal shoved in the mouth of someone who dared to have an opinion. And there was also the punishment for colic. Yes, there were cases where women writhing in pain were accused of being possessed by demons. The treatment: tie them to a bench and pray until it stopped. If it didn't stop, throw them in the river. If she sank, she was innocent, but drowned. If she floated, witch. Sentence: burned alive. And you thinking PMS was difficult today. Now there is a curious law: prohibition of clothing above one's status. If you dared to use a piece of noble fabric without having a title, you could be arrested. Clothes had codes like a QR code of poverty. Wore something too beautiful? Jail. Because beauty without nobility was considered a visual affront. And there was also the law of bread. The baker who made bread too light was punished. Why? Because it was thought he was stealing on the weight, literally. So besides baking, he was obliged to add an extra loaf to compensate for any error on the scale. If he didn't add it, hands cut off. Yes, by the hands. Because cutting bread was a privilege, cutting hands was justice. But relax, there is still more. In the Middle Ages, spitting could be a crime. Singing out of time could be a crime. Eating meat on Friday, crime. Eating meat that wasn't yours, double crime. Eating meat and smiling, heresy and crime. Everything was punishable, sometimes with a fine, sometimes with public humiliation, sometimes with hanging, and sometimes with things that you can't even classify. Like placing a rat inside an iron cage, trapping it against your stomach, and heating the cage until the rat dug a tunnel inside you. This was used repeatedly in the name of the law. And no, it wasn't an exaggeration. It was just Tuesday. You look at the grey sky, swallow another piece of bread that feels like a roof tile and think, at least today, no one accused me of witchcraft. But then you remember you thought that out loud and the baker heard. Good luck. Tomorrow you are sitting there still. The wooden bench creaks more than your joints, and the smell of the village remains that classic mix: smoke, sweat, and a dash of aged urine. Everything indicates the day went on normally, which of course means someone else was condemned for something completely questionable. Apparently, a lady was accused of feeding a demon. The investigation revealed that the demon was a grey cat sleeping in the window. And yes, she was arrested because a grey cat looking too much was the type of behavior that raises suspicions, especially if the cat seems intelligent. Intelligent cats were a huge problem in that era. While people whisper about the case, the priest climbs onto a rock and announces, "Tomorrow there will be a special trial, not of a person, but of an animal." You think you heard wrong, but no, that's exactly it. The defendant is a pig. The motive: the pig allegedly bit the baker's son. The child, poor thing, messed with the animal's food, and the animal responded as any hungry and mistreated creature would, with a defensive attack. Result: the pig will be judged for attempted murder, with the right to a lawyer and everything. The lawyer is the same one who defends humans. He is practicing his speech with a piece of turnip as if it were a microphone. He takes it seriously, much more seriously than you expected. The next day the whole village is gathered. The pig is brought in with a collar made of rope and a look of total swine innocence. The judge, a man with a disheveled beard and disproportionate hat, reads the crimes with solemnity. Hereby, the defendant is accused of injuring, with deliberate intent, a human infant of tender age. The conduct of the swine infringes on the peace of the lordship and attacks good customs. Yes, good customs. Given that, as far as anyone knows, the pig only did what any living being, hungry and clueless, would do: bit what invaded its space. The trial lasts 2 hours. The pig grunts. The lawyer defends with arguments like absence of intentional malice and failure of interspecies communication. The judge shakes his head thoughtfully. In the end, he sentences the animal to death, hanging. The village applauds. You can only think. Imagine if the goat steals bread tomorrow. These bizarre trials today were more common than one imagines, and not just with pigs. Rats were once accused of destroying crops and had the right to a formal defense. When they didn't appear at the tribunal, perhaps because they were busy being rats, the lawyer argued that the village cats prevented his clients from presenting themselves safely. The judge considered the argument serious. But if you think only animals faced these legal pearls, breathe deep. Humans also got their daily dose of punitive nonsense. There was, for example, the infamous law of smiling widows. If a recently widowed woman was seen laughing or with a countenance that was too light a few days after the burial, she was accused of conspiracy or emotional murder. The punishment varied between social isolation and physical punishment. And no, nobody explained what exactly a light countenance was, probably anything that wasn't sobbing and lamenting in Latin. There was also the law of shoes above income. Yes, shoes. In some regions, the size and color of footwear indicated your status. Wearing boots too long or too decorated without having a noble title was a crime. There were even feudal fashion inspectors, real inspectors with a stick to measure shoes. If you were caught with a shoe above your station, you could be fined or, in extreme cases, forced to walk barefoot for a month as a form of re-educating humiliation. Because, of course, walking barefoot in the Middle Ages with mud, bugs and rocks was just a light form of punishment. And we cannot forget the law of fair bread already mentioned. It wasn't a metaphor, it was literal. The baker who delivered bread under the weight could be punished with whipping or be dragged through the streets with a sign on his neck written, "Deceiver of the People." But mind you, the problem wasn't the theft itself, it was the bread. Mess with the people's bread, mess with the only real comfort in a diet of pottage and broth tasting of hopelessness. That is why the law was severe. Now, if you think there was a safe place in this sea of insanities, I am sorry to inform you. Not even the churches escaped. There were regulations like the prohibition of singing out of tonality during Mass, something that, according to records, has caused expulsions of out-of-tune faithful. In one monastery, it was noted that a brother was punished with 3 days of forced silence for having whispered "Amen" out of time. 3 days without speaking, which honestly might have been a blessing. The most curious thing about all this is that for them it made sense. Every law, however absurd, was seen as a way to preserve divine, moral and social order. And if that meant judging a pig, forcing women to wear black for months, or dragging disobedient shoemakers through the square, so be it. You at this point aren't even surprised anymore. You look at the condemned pig, now stuffed in the corner of the square as a public warning, and think, actually, he had a fairer trial than most people. Here comes the church bell again. 3 tolls. Time to close the windows, shut your mouth, and pretend you don't exist. Because living here is walking on the edge of an invisible regulation that changes according to the wind and the priest's mood. Tomorrow, for sure, someone will be punished for something new. Maybe for laughing loud, maybe for dreaming of wine, Maybe just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong clothes and a slightly suspicious posture. You lie down or throw yourself on top of the straw, trying to avoid the wet parts. And before closing your eyes, you mentally review all the bizarre laws you heard, not for culture, but for precaution, and ask yourself, is yawning out loud a crime too? Maybe it's better not to risk it. The night passed without anyone banging on your door, which by your standard of medieval living is basically a miracle. Tomorrow arrives dragging, without official announcement, without coffee, without pleasure. You only realize the day has started because the neighbor's rooster sang right in your ear. Not a glorious song like those on a happy farm, a scream of choked despair. It seems he dreamed of the pig's trial. With reason. The village is quieter than usual, which of course means public punishment is being prepared. And as a good resident of this juridically elaborate world, you decide to go see. Not out of curiosity, but because not showing up can also be interpreted as passive rebellion. In the square a circle forms, in the center a young man kneeling. Reason for punishment was caught hiding to read a book of poems out loud to himself under a tree. Yes, he read poetry, and someone heard and thought it too sensual. The accusation instigating impure thoughts through indecorous metaphors. The penalty, 3 lashes, a week without speaking to anyone, and the prohibition of approaching trees. Because now the trees are accomplices. You don't even fake surprise. The public doesn't either. Someone even brings a basket of apples to eat while watching. It is basically the medieval equivalent of popcorn. Punishment finished, the guards announce, tomorrow there will be an inspection in the houses, searching for signs of behavior outside divine order. This includes walking barefoot without apparent need, having objects of vibrant color, laughing alone, storing too much bread. This last one is especially delicate. Having too much bread means you're either stealing, hiding food from the collective, or making a pact with supernatural forces that multiply food. In other words, either thief, selfish, or Satanist. Choose your label. On the way back, you try to remember how many loaves you have hidden. 3 half-moldy ones, but still edible. You consider eating them all at once just for legal safety and stomach safety. On the way, you cross paths with a nun. She walks slowly, carries a parchment, and casts a judgmental glance at you regarding the summer before last. You don't answer, because talking to nuns on the street can be interpreted as an intention of seduction. Yes, that has led to jail and forced marriage in sequence. But today is not a day for romantic crimes. Today is cleaning day, literally. The whole village participates in the ritual known as scrubbing of dirty souls, which in practice is just an excuse to inspect houses and judge decorations. Too many candles, paganism, jars with herbs, witchcraft, ragdoll, idolatry, cats sleeping on top of the oven, demonic cult. You clean your house with the speed of someone who wants to live another day. Hide the bread, the nice spoon, the piece of purple fabric you thought was too pretty. Anything that can be interpreted as vanity, including your gaze. The next day, the inspectors arrive. They don't wear badges, they wear expressions of disgust and crucifixes hanging from their waists. They enter, look at everything, ask why your bed has fluffier straw than the neighbor's. You answer that it is old straw. They note, structured lie. In the end, they leave grumbling that you have eyes that are too alive, and that this can indicate a restless mind. You thank them and promise to look less. When they leave, you relax for 5 seconds, until you remember that this afternoon there is a community wedding, and that if you don't attend, you can be accused of breaking the matrimonial harmony of the village. The ceremony happens next to the well. A couple who barely knows each other will be united by divine, social, and economic imposition. The priest smiles, the bride and groom do not. You fake enthusiasm, clap your hands, know you need to appear happy because expressing public discomfort at a sacred event can earn penance. And if you think the hardest part is marrying without love, it's because you haven't seen the list of legal, conjugal obligations. Some of them, sleeping always facing the same side, considered purer. Not sighing loudly during the conjugal act, considered theatrical. Asking permission to kiss on holy days. There were even laws that allowed anonymous tips of suspicious marital behavior, like a couple that talks too much or too little or laughs together or never laughs. Marriage there was a contract, and a watch contract. You observe everything with dead eyes and think about how every gesture, every movement, every sigh can be interpreted as a crime by the law, by the church, by the gossiping neighbor. And the most curious thing is that everyone accepts it. No one revolts, because living in fear has become normal, as if the laws were just a part of the weather, like the wind or the mold. You go back home mentally tired. The body didn't even make an effort today, but the brain worked trying to remember all the invisible rules that keep you away from the gallows. Before lying down, you look at the hidden bread and think, eat now or hide deeper. Decide to hide it again, because in the Middle Ages, even appetite could be considered rebellion. And so ends another day of obedience, paranoia, and tense digestion. Good night, for now. Tomorrow arrives dragging, as always. There is no alarm, only a new smell coming from the street. Something between roasted meat and burnt leather, which in the Middle Ages can mean banquet or execution. Sometimes both. In sequence. You leave the house with caution. The straw shoes, if that can be called a shoe, are damp and stink of peasant nostalgia. The village is gathered in the square, and since every medieval gathering means some kind of punishment, you approach discreetly. Today, the condemned is a white-haired lady. Motive: was seen walking alone through the village during sunrise. Yes, alone early in the morning without authorization. The official accusation: suspicious movement in witching hours. No one knows what a witching hour would be, but apparently it includes any moment when the priest hasn't woken up yet. She defends herself, saying she woke up with back pain and went to look for lemon balm. The judge, a priest with sleepiness and weak coffee, responds that a woman's back doesn't hurt without a spiritual reason. Sentence: 1 day trapped inside a barrel. That's right, a barrel with holes for breathing and periodic rotation in the square for purification by movement. As she is loaded inside the wood, you observe the faces around. Most don't even bother. Some children laugh. A boy sells anti-barrel amulets for 2 coins and a piece of cheese. All very normal. But what really catches your attention is the new poster hanging on the post. Forbidden to sing during rains. The explanation: singing while it rains can be interpreted as an invitation for demonic storms. You read, reread, and realize that yesterday you hummed while washing your feet with rainwater. Paranoia activated. You decide to walk the rest of the day in absolute silence, including inside. But even your thoughts seem suspicious. Remembering a song? Potential melodic heresy. Thinking of wine? Sin by anticipation. Imagining your life somewhere else? Rebellion of the spirit. In the midst of this, you almost forget that today is also market day. And at the market, well, every step is a legal risk. First, there is the law of emotional weight of goods. A tomato too red can be accused of having been cultivated with witchcraft. A carrot too crooked can represent a bad omen. A fish that stares at you for too long? Aquatic curse. You walk between the stalls, trying to appear as neutral as possible. Neither happy, nor sad, nor interested, nor distant. Wall expression. But walls have already been accused of hiding spirits, so not even that is a guarantee. At the dried fruit stall, a girl trips and drops 3 dates. They roll innocently to the feet of an ecclesiastical inspector. He doesn't hesitate. This is sacred waste. She tries to explain herself, but talking too much is interpreted as defiance. Talking too little as guilt, she chooses the middle ground and ends up with the standard penalty, carrying a basket of stones on her head to the end of the village. You help gather the dates in silence, but someone sees you smiling from the corner of your mouth. Smiling in moments of tension can be interpreted as mockery, and mockery is a crime, or almost. A man stares at you. You return the look by instinct. He asks if you challenge him. You say no, but with a firm voice. Firm voice is arrogance. Low voice is dissimulation. You fake a cough and walk away. Later, near the fountain, you see a boy being reprimanded. He was caught with a carved stick, said it was just a toy, an improvised wand. The guard thought it was a pagan symbol. Sentence: stay on knees on raw corn until the next mass, and burn the stick to avoid re-enchantment by carelessness. You decide not to carry anything else in your pocket. Not stones, not feathers, not hopes. But the law that intrigues you most appears in the late afternoon. Prohibition of shadow on a holy day. No one knows for sure what that means. Some interpret that it is a sin to position oneself so that your shadow touches something sacred. Others think it is just a metaphor to not disturb the mystical atmosphere of the village. Anyway, the warning is clear. If you project a shadow over the chapel altar, the punishment can be severe. No one knows what, but severe and ambiguous. You spend the rest of the day trying to predict where the sun will hit, walk sideways, avoid reflecting light on sacred surfaces, walk in a zigzag in the square. Someone asks if you are possessed. You answer that you are just trying not to be punished. The person understands because everyone here lives like this. At night, the atmosphere is heavy, the moon is full, and that alone is a cause for tension. Full moon attracts all types of legal panic. People lock themselves in their houses. Others pray more than usual. A couple fastens cutlery to the ceiling as mystical protection, a family tradition that no one knows if it is accepted or punishable. You cover yourself with the most neutral cloth you have. Close your eyes and wish with all your strength to dream of something that cannot be interpreted as illegal, like corn. Corn is safe, so far. You try to sleep for real, but it is difficult when the wood of the house creaks as if announcing every moral error you have ever committed. Outside, the wind blows like an old man grumbling, and you swear you heard your neighbor's name being spat into the air. But you close your eyes anyway for two reasons. Exhaustion, one, and staring at the medieval darkness with open eyes helps nothing. When the day finally drags itself to you, the weather already warns. Trouble is coming and coming fast. The fog is thicker than turnip soup, and the sound of bells hits straight on your spine. They only ring like that when something big is happening. And big is rarely good. You dress in a hurry, trip on your own worn sandal, the same since 1319, and go out. The ground is still wet from dew, or perhaps from something worse. The whole village concentrates in the square where a rope was stretched between two trunks. It's not for drying clothes, it's for drying sinners. A boy will be hanged. Young. Didn't even have a full beard. The motive runs from mouth to mouth, profaned the rest of a sacred field. You widen your eyes without understanding. The field, in truth, was just a piece of land next to the cemetery, where he was seen digging at night. They said he was looking for something buried. He swears he only wanted to recover an amulet of his mother that fell on the day of the burial. But it is too late to explain calmly. Someone already screamed sacrilege, and the word caught like fire in straw. In the Middle Ages, that was enough. Doubt was a luxury reserved for saints and nobles. For commoners, a wrong whisper in the tavern or a strange gesture before the priest was enough. The boy tries to argue, asks to be judged fairly, but the judge, who is also the owner of the mill and father-in-law of the baker, says justice has already been done. The people saw, the people know, and God doesn't like those who mess with the dead. You watch in silence because any misplaced word could take you from the bleachers straight to the rope. The crowd compresses, someone crosses themselves, another releases a dramatic throat clearing, and then the executioner does his job without haste, without pleasure, only duty. The body sways with the wind, and with it the clear message. The sacred is not touched, not to clean, not to cry. The silence lasts a few seconds until someone starts talking about the new spiritual protective measures the village will adopt. The first of them, prohibit the presence of dogs in cemeteries. Yes, dogs, they say, they go around smelling the tombs, and since the devil also smells, it is better not to risk it. You return home without commenting on anything. The hay of your bed is moldier than normal. The pig sleeps inside because it rained, and his heat is what remains of comfort for you. Outside, you hear footsteps. Another group passes, nailing notices on doors. The door-to-door visits are now frequent. Every week, a new law, a new restriction, a new please, collaborate or be purified. The rules don't come in the form of a royal decree. They come from the mouths of monks. And when it comes from their mouths, it is as if they came straight from eternity. Today, for example, the conversation revolves around the excessive presence of colors in fabrics. Glows that are too alive are allegedly offending Christian simplicity. You remember your blanket dyed with beet scraps? Already imagining the bonfire? Punishments change with the tides. Have you seen people with tongues ripped out for blasphemy? Have you seen a woman being forced to walk naked through the village for suspicion of seduction in liturgical hours? Have you seen a child with shaved hair for laughing at the time of Mass? And no one talks about this as if it were a scandal. They talk like someone commenting on the rain, like someone saying, yeah, it rained early today, except in this case it rains blood and shame. And it is normal at dinner time if you can call a thin broth and a piece of bread that looks like a brick dinner, you hear your neighbor complaining of back pain. Soon after he shuts up, because last month a man was accused of simulating diseases to escape church obligations, took 5 lashes for corporeal fraud. So now the rule is suffer quietly, preferably without showing. Night falls, the fog rises, and you already lying down think, if tomorrow I breathe too deeply in the square, will they arrest me for disrespect to the sacred atmosphere? Better not even test it. The rope was still there, only the body had already been removed. The space became empty, but the weight did not. In fact, it seemed that everything there gained weight with time. The stones, the glances, the silences, even the wind walked thicker. You avoided passing by the square, but it was difficult when the well was right there. Water was essential, even if it came accompanied by whispers about heresies. And if you stopped fetching it, soon someone would insinuate that you were hiding your thirst in the name of the devil. Today, however, the square wasn't just heavy, it was noisy. A man screamed near the well, not screaming out of despair, nor for a fight. He screamed like someone who knew he needed to be heard, otherwise he would be the next to be silenced. He accused another man of looking crookedly at his cow. That's right. The cow. He said the look had dried the animal's milk, that it was witchcraft, that the beast was healthy and out of nowhere dried up like skin in the sun. The explanation was obvious. The neighbor was the culprit. The accused, of course, denied it, said he was only looking at the cow because she seemed sad. And boom, that was enough, because sad cows were also a sign of a pact with dark forces. The judge was called. No one expected the judge's justice anymore. They only expected some quick decision. The judge listened to both, made a gesture with his hand, and decided that both were wrong. One for looking too much, the other for not protecting the animal. The sentence, each one would have to spend the entire day carrying water from the fountain to the cow, taking turns. That's right, taking turns of punishment, because in doubt, punish both. Avoided discussions, and there you were holding your bucket, trying not to stare at any animal. In the corner of the square, an elderly woman whispered to another. They discussed if the bad harvest had come because someone planted beans on a holy day. In many regions, sacred dates had prohibited crops, but the calendars were confusing. There were local holy days, kingdom holy days that only the priest knew. One mistake and punishment, or as they called it, spiritual re-education via forced fasting. It didn't take long, and the round of the inspector of openings began. That's right. He verified if the windows of the houses were too big. Generous windows were considered disrespect to humility, and in times of plague, large openings meant sanitary arrogance. Everything was symbolic. Everything was risk. He knocked on your door, said your window seemed too optimistic. You smiled and then realized smiling was an error. Said it was just nervousness. He nodded, noted something, went away. You stayed the rest of the morning wondering what one writes in a report of architectural optimism. In the village, there was also the tacit rule that no one could not blame anyone. That's right. When something went wrong, a plantation failed, an animal got sick, a candle went out without reason, someone needed to be held responsible, it wasn't enough to say, "I don't know." Saying "I don't know" was laziness, was neglect, was omission, complicity. It was like that a boy named Bertrand ended up spending the afternoon trapped in a barrel. The barrel was used for onion fermentation, but served well for minor punishments. His crime, not having managed to point out the culprit for a rat plague. He had said only, "I think it is just the cold." Bad answer. Weak answer. The people wanted a name, and he gave the weather. The barrel stayed in the middle of the square with Bertrand inside, head out. Someone put an apple in his mouth to aestheticize the disgrace. The excuse was the pedagogy of laughter. If it is ridiculous, it teaches more. You saw everything while drinking your broth. Yes, with contained laughter. And then, to complete, the royal mailman arrives, a thin, hunched figure with a staff that rattles bells. He brought a new decree. The use of mirrors was suspended during the month of August. The motive was clear. Mirrors could capture images and with them the spirit. And since August was a month of astral transition, any reflection was considered a risk of unwanted crossing between worlds. You didn't even have a mirror, but knew that now even the water's surface could be viewed poorly. In other words, bathing and looking at the bucket was almost an act of invocation. Someone next to you commented softly, "This is all to keep us occupied." You pretended not to hear, because even simple phrases could turn into a trial. And so the day drained away, didn't end, didn't reach a climax, just drained like bad porridge, like a crooked candle, like fear that neither lights nor goes out. You looked at the clouds and prayed in your own way, not for justice nor for peace. Prayed that no one noticed, that you hadn't accused anyone this week yet. The medieval routine has these things. When the world isn't punishing you for breathing loudly, it decides to be creative. And the judicial creativity of that week was salty. You had already heard about it. People whispered between one blessing and another, always looking sideways. They said a new practice of punishment was being tested in a neighboring village. And of course, when something works in causing suffering, it becomes a trend. The fashion was called penance with salt. It didn't involve whipping nor public exposure, just open wounds and a good dose of seasoning. It was like this. The condemned had to confess their sins, kneel in church and receive small incisions on the shoulders. Afterwards, the monks poured coarse salt into the openings, covering with blessed cloths. The objective was to purify from the inside out. And according to the local priest, if it burns, it is because the evil is coming out. The first to experience it was a woman who argued with her husband out loud. The husband was the monk's cousin. The monk was the judge's brother-in-law. The judge was in a bad mood, done. She was taken at the end of the afternoon, when the light of the chapel already hit slanted, as if even the sun was ashamed. She didn't scream, only cried. The people thought it dignified, and the priest, emotional, said that grace had been restored. After that, Spontaneous denunciations began. People who turned in the neighbor for whistling popular hymns, another for speaking to a stranger without asking the name of the patron saint. There were even those who accused their own mother for laughing while sewing. You spent the days in silence, avoiding humming, avoiding appearing satisfied, avoiding even chewing with pleasure, because deep down that was all the system wanted. Quiet bodies, minds on alert, and hearts cauterized with coarse salt. On the main street, a new notice was nailed to the blacksmith's gate. It is forbidden to spit in the embers. Motive. The smoke could carry unsaid words. Unsaid words were suspicious, and the heat could amplify contained blasphemies. You didn't even know how to react, only knew that now you needed to turn your face every time you stood near the fire. On that same day, while trying to negotiate a piece of dried bacon, you saw a scene that in any other era might seem like a joke. Two men fighting over a silence. Yes, a silence. One of them swore the other had failed to respond to a good morning on purpose, that it was deliberate disrespect. The other said he didn't hear, but it was too late. The first took the complaint to the judge. Result, both were condemned to spend the afternoon chained to each other, repeating, "Good morning," without stopping until the sun set. You thought about laughing, but contained yourself. You were getting good at this. Laughing mentally without moving your face was the only form of safe comedy. Later, on the way back, you saw something hanging on the bakery door, a sack of flour with a rope around it. It was a symbol. It became a symbol that week. They said whoever tied flour to the door was asking for protection against trials. It was the new amulet of fashion. You, of course, had neither flour nor rope, but hung an old cloth anyway, just to not appear fearless. Too much courage was seen as pride. And pride, well, pride could lead to the barrel or the bonfire. Depends on the priest's mood. At nightfall, while heating water with an undefined smell, you heard a strange movement outside. It wasn't screams. It was something worse. Quick laughs, choked, guilty. You peeked through the crack and saw two boys exchanging objects hidden under a cape. One of them held a die, a game of chance. In the Middle Ages, gambling was a sin, especially if it involved laughter. Luck was seen as a challenge to divine providence. If you trusted chance, it was because you doubted God's plan. You closed the crack, pretended you didn't see, but knew someone would see, always saw, and someone would denounce. And the judge, between a blessing and a piece of dry chicken, would decide the fate of the boys. Outside, the wind returned to blow colder. The pig stirred in the corner of the house, grumbling in pig language. You looked at the ceiling, said a quick prayer, nothing sophisticated. Just asked not to have to feel salt burning on skin, at least this week. The next morning the sun appeared as if apologizing. Weak, pale, and without enthusiasm. Resembled you, but the village was agitated, which is never a good sign. You went out to get a little firewood, pretending not to hear the rumors, but they reached you anyway. You couldn't run from gossip in the Middle Ages. It ran faster than any messenger and hurt more than any truth. They said a woman had been taken to the monastery during the dawn. Motive? Dreamed wrong. That's right, dreamed. And the problem wasn't even the content, at least not directly. The problem was that she told it. In the line for the well, she mentioned something about an enchanted forest and a voice singing her name. Just that. But someone heard, and someone said the voice must be a spirit, and that enchanted forests were enemy territory. It didn't take long. 3 men banged on her door, one with a crucifix, another with a leather belt. The third just watched. There is always the one who just watches. And note this, she tried to laugh as if it were a joke, but laughing at fear was another type of heresy. Laughing too much, actually, was a recurrent risk, because joy outside the church was seen as imbalance of the spirit or light possession. You pretended you didn't care, But you did, because the night before you had also dreamed of fresh bread, butter, a clean towel, dangerous dreams, dreams that insinuate hope. You decided then to stop commenting on your dreams. Better yet, decided not to dream, or if you dreamed, pretend you didn't. If asked, say everything was dark, just dark. Darkness and prayers, nothing more. In the middle of the afternoon, a new announcement echoed through the village. Tired voice, as always, but firm. It was the local preacher, bringing one more interpretative order. Starting that week, any residents with more than 2 stools would be inspected. Motive, sign of frequent meetings. And meetings, as everyone knows, are fertile ground for conspiracy. Only 2 people can sit in the same house without raising suspicion. 3 is already a council, 4 is a sect, 5 a coven. You, of course, had 3 stools. One was your grandfather's, inherited with termites and all. Another served as support for the pot. The third was good. It was the pig's. He liked to climb up and watch the street. Now that could cost dearly. You stacked the 3, put them on top of the cabinet, disguised with a cloth, and hoped no one thought folded cloth was an occult symbol. Next to your house, the baker whispered with his wife. She seemed distressed. He gestured. The reason for the discussion was serious. The dough wasn't rising like before, and someone had already insinuated that maybe it was a plague. Yes, the bread dough. They said when the yeast doesn't act, it can be the fault of the evil eye or a spirit trapped in the flour, or worse yet, a cursed batch. The baker crossed himself, buried part of the dough, and decided to donate the rest to the orphanage, in the hope that pure children would neutralize the spiritual charge. You just observed sitting, standing, moving, always trying to appear busy, because unoccupied people, well, were easier to be noticed. At the end of the day, you passed by the chapel. The priest distributed blessings in exchange for promises, a coin for every little forgotten sin. Preventive offering, he said. A man paid 3 coins just to guarantee his laugh during supper wasn't taken seriously. You had no coins, only fear and a leftover potato. The priest refused, but accepted a respectful nod. Said humility is also currency, and you, just in case, bowed twice, just to yield spiritual interest. Back home, the pig was restless. Probably had smelled the neighbor's chestnuts, or perhaps sensed one more long night loaded with prohibited dreams. You lay in the dark and for the first time in days caught yourself praying with conviction, not for protection nor for cure, but for oniric amnesia. If you dreamed, that you wouldn't remember. If you remembered, that you would forget before opening your mouth. It didn't take long for you to realize that walking around looking like someone who slept well was also dangerous. The most attentive eyes, generally of people who no longer had teeth, started to stare at you with certain distrust. An old woman went so far as to ask in a subtly threatening tone, "So, dreamed a lot last night?" You changed the subject, said you woke up several times with stomach pain. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the expected answer either. She furrowed her brow and commented something about spiritual symptoms. You smiled because you didn't know what to do, and she went away, still suspicious. The village, which was already a board game of tensions, now seemed like a theme party, where the theme was collective delirium. Everything gained interpretation. Everything was a sign of something. The chapel bell rang twice off schedule. A monk tripped on the bell, but no one believed that version. They said it was an omen, that 2 rings out of time indicated duplicity in faith. They started looking for the heretic. You were among the suspects, because days ago you had been seen looking at the church tower with what they called an excessively reflective expression. Yes, reflection was looked down upon. Thinking too much was arrogance. Only saints could reflect in a low voice and escape unharmed. The tension increased when a novice had a recurrent dream. She said she saw an extended hand covering the village. Didn't know if it was a blessing or a threat, but it was enough. They took her to the cloister and said she would spend a week without eye contact with anyone to reduce the load of visions. You saw when they isolated her. The people applauded. Faith loved to isolate. Later, while helping to stack firewood at the church entrance, you heard a comment from the sacristan. They were considering watching houses at night, looking for people who moved too much while sleeping. Night movements were suspicious. Who dreams a lot moves. Who moves lives dangerously. You decided right there to sleep on your side, without covers, without a pillow, still immobile. A corpse training for the real day. At night, while the village slept in fear of its own pillow, a trial was scheduled. Yes, at night. Because, as the judge said, if sin doesn't sleep, justice shouldn't either. The defendant, a man accused of sleepwalking, no one saw, but someone heard, and that was enough. A woman said she heard light steps passing near her door. How did she know it wasn't an animal? By the rhythm. According to her, it was the rhythm of sin, an anxious, urgent cadence. Could only be someone trying to escape their own dreams. They took the man to the square. He denied everything, said he barely slept, that he had only gone to urinate and came back. But that was worse, because urinating out of time could also be interpreted as disrespect to the sacred cycles of the night. The sentence wasn't physical. This time, the judge wanted to innovate. The man would have to sleep on the chapel altar for 3 nights in a row, being observed by monks who would make notes of every movement. They called this oriented spiritual vigilance. You saw everything and were certain even sleep became a spectacle. On the way back, you stumbled upon a group of youths speaking low, almost whispering. One of them told that in the neighboring village, a man was condemned for dreaming twice of the same person. They called it pagan fidelity. You didn't know what else could be watched, but decided that from that night on you would try not to sleep, or sleep the minimum, or sleep in cycles, or in pieces. Arrived home, looked at the pig. He slept with indecent tranquility. Gave you envy and fear. You tucked yourself into the darkest corner of the house, where not even the moonlight seemed to accuse you. Breathed short, closed your eyes, and thought of a stone. Just a stone. Nothing beyond a stone. That was it, your new standard dream. A block of stone standing still, colorless, soundless, soulless, everything you needed to survive. You woke up with a strange sound. It wasn't a scream or a bell. It was a cough, the kind that echoes like a funeral announcement. Didn't know where it came from, but already knew. Someone was going to suffer today. Maybe you, maybe not. Luck in the Middle Ages was basically that, surviving the roulette of collective disgrace. Resolved to go out to get firewood. Simple. Walk, pick up wood, come back. But even that was too much. A boy saw you walking and ran in the opposite direction. It was always a bad sign when someone fled just seeing you walking. You followed without running, without singing, without smiling, because any of those options could be a motive. Arriving at the trail of dry branches, you realized the wind was restless. The leaves shook as if trying to get rid of the tree. Typical omen, or maybe just autumn, but no one called it autumn. They called it time of the trial. On the way back, you passed near the chapel and saw that something was happening. 3 people kneeling on the stone floor. One of them muttered disconnected phrases, the others cried. Beside them, the priest with an expression of absolute boredom. It was another session of oniric reconciliation. It became a trend. Now whoever dreamed something considered strange was summoned to report everything. Kneeling, of course, told the dream, the details, the sensations. Then came the monks to interpret. There wasn't a clear criterion. The dream could be seen as sacred or as a sin in the form of a metaphor. Normally it was the second. The kneeling man said he had seen an infinite ladder. The priest said that symbolized pride. The woman dreamed of the sea, was accused of carnal desires. The other dreamed of silence. Silence was rebellion. Silence was the devil's hiding place. You pretended not to listen, but listened to everything. Tried to hurry your step, but remembered the new norm. Hurrying without clear reason is a sign of restlessness of the soul. So you walked slowly, even with the firewood weighing like guilt. Upon arriving home, you found a mark drawn on the floor. A symbol that looked like a poorly drawn fish was the warning. It meant, observe yourself. Someone had done this while you were out. Didn't know who, but knew why. Walking without motive was now a minor sin. You sat in the darkest corner of the house. The pigs snored. The hay was damp, the water tasted of rust, but what bothered you was the silence outside. The whole village in silence was never good. Too much silence was a vacuum, and the vacuum, according to last month's sermon, was fertile ground for evil to plant ideas. Soon the sound returned, a light beat, rhythmic on the door. You breathed deep, opened. It was the sacristan. He said few words, said that on that Friday you should appear at the chapel. Collective interpretation of unconscious conducts. It was the name of the new ritual. Didn't need to bring anything, just the dreams of the last week. You nodded because saying "I don't dream" could be seen as spiritual blockage, and saying "I don't remember" was a sign of resistance to the truth. After he left, you sat down again, but now differently, like someone trying not to seem like a dreamer. The afternoon was long because everything was long, the day, the conversations, the punishments, the pauses. Even time seemed to be serving a sentence. On the other side of the street, an old woman shook her head at you. She was certain you were hiding something. Maybe because last month you dropped a piece of bread and bent down too fast. The memory of the people was long when it came to other people's faults. In the Middle Ages, error was like a puddle. Step in once, the mud follows you to the soul. And so you ended the day sitting, looking at the floor, trying not to think of dreams, trying not to remember that 3 nights ago you had dreamed of an open field, clear sky, and no judgment, a danger, a daydream, a crime. Better to forget, better to pretend you don't even sleep. Market day, which in theory should be cheering, but in practice only meant more people to look at you wrong. You prepared early or as early as your body allowed. Washed your face with water from the bucket, which now you didn't even know if you could use without asking a blessing, since they were saying water mirrors confuse the saints. If looking at the puddle could be vanity, imagine seeing yourself in it. Even so, you went. The trail to the market passed by the stable, where a poorly written sign hung from a crooked nail, forbidden to feed animals with the left hand. No one explained the motive, but the bad tongues said the left hand had a connection with the dark side of the soul, and also with a priest who had been bitten by a goat just while using the left. Coincidence or not, it became a rule. You adjusted the blanket, now with a new hole, and continued. The entrance to the market was marked by an arch of dry branches and a cauldron with smoke. The smoke was aromatic, made of protective herbs. They said it served to scare away sins before they entered, but it also left everyone coughing and with burning eyes, which perhaps was the true punishment. Inside, the atmosphere was uncomfortably festive. People negotiating fish, smelling of yesterday, crooked candles on sale, fabrics with only one color, because 2 were now aesthetic heresy. Nothing of red fruits. Red was under suspicion, color too associated with fire, and the demon, and desires, and honestly everything they found a way to prohibit. You looked at an ironing board, which of course wasn't used for that. It was an old plank with holes, sold as spiritual support for bread. No one knew exactly what it meant, but speaking ill of the name was disrespect to the artisan, who was also the judge and the barber. On the other side, a group of women observed a dog with very straight ears. They were in doubt if that was natural or a sign of witchcraft. Someone commented that the animal only obeyed whispered orders, which could indicate a pact. Another said she saw the beast staring fixedly at a lit candle last week. Silence. Clear sign of judgment on the way. The owner of the dog tried to intervene, but it was too late. They called the market guard. Yes, there was one with a whistle made of bird bone. He heard the reports, scratched his chin and decreed the dog would go through a week of spiritual fasting, only water, no meat, nor bones, because according to him, confused spirits feed on the blood of the world. You pretended not to hear. Passed by an egg stall but hesitated to buy. They said eggs came from chickens that laid at noon, a time considered spiritually infertile. Better not risk it. Further on, you found an old acquaintance, a guy named Anselmo, who now sold potions against murmuring, vials with a cloudy liquid, smell of garlic and promise of protection against malicious gossip. According to him, one drop was enough and the truth closed around the soul. You almost bought, but Anselmo was a relative of a woman who was burned for carrying 9 spoons in her purse. And 9 was a sorcerous number, according to the local almanac, which curiously changed every full moon. Preferred to leave hungry, thirsty, but with dignity intact, or what remained of it. On the way back, found a new announcement nailed to a tree in fat, half-blurred letters. Attention. Any act of excessive generosity will be analyzed. Kindness without cause can be malign influence in disguise. You breathed deep and decided right there to stop smiling at neighbors, stop offering firewood, stop sharing soup, because now even kindness was proof that you were hiding intentions. The Middle Ages was this, a theater where the plot changed without warning, but the ending was always the same. And as always, no one knew for sure who the author was. You arrived home and pushed the door slowly to avoid noise. But the noise came anyway, not from the wood, from someone's mouth. There was a woman standing nearby, pretending to fix a basket, but with her neck turned more toward your window than the basket. She coughed twice. It didn't seem like illness. It seemed like a warning. Warning that you had been seen. You entered, closed the door, sat down. The hay in the corner was now moldy with something that seemed to be developing its own personality. The pig grunted slowly. The water bucket was still half full, but you distrusted it. Since the decree of dangerous reflections, even looking at the bottom of the bucket had become a spiritual decision. The window creaked with the wind. You didn't know whether to close it or leave it open. Closing could be interpreted as suspicious isolation, open too much as ostentation. In doubt, you tied a thick cloth on it, middle ground, half guilt. The village was too quiet. It was late afternoon, but it seemed someone had drawn silence over the houses. Outside, monks passed in pairs as if patrolling. One of them carried a baton with bells. They said it was to ward off bad energies, but everyone knew it was for you to know they were coming. Just hearing the little bells was enough to know it was time to appear pious. You got up, began to reorganize the few things you had, repeated this gesture every day, not for cleanliness, but to appear busy with earthly things. Idle people attract the void. It was one of the phrases hanging on the chapel door. Suddenly a knock, 3 taps, pause, 2 more. It was the pattern of official communiques. You opened. It was a thin young man with deep eyes, holding a roll of parchment and a wax seal. He didn't smile, handed over a notice and went away without saying anything. The parchment said, "Neighborhood summons. Your house will be visited tomorrow for sound analysis. Maintain ritual silence and prepare for the behavior hearing." You read again. Behavior hearing. Didn't know what it meant, but knew it wasn't good. Spent the whole night thinking about the noises of your house. The crack of the beam, the sound of the bucket, the pig's snore, the sound of hay being stirred, the accidental clinking of the spoon, everything, every micro noise became a possible sentence. And of course, the riskiest, yourself, your way of walking, sneezing, yawning, even breathing, especially if it was very deep. Prolonged inspiration was seen as presumption. They said only the proud took too much air. You decided you were going to sleep sitting up because lying down, the body snores. And snoring too much was lack of internal vigilance. The dawn was long. Every time the pig turned, you held your breath. The wind outside hissed as if passing inside your spine. The beam creaked. The spoon fell once. A disaster. But you pretended it was a dream, tried to convince yourself it didn't happen. When dawn broke, you were pale and ready for one more trial. Without crime, without defense, without logic, just noise. The day dawned smelling of wet wood and tension. You didn't even touch the bucket, nor the pig, nor yourself. Stayed sitting waiting, as if breathing less would postpone the arrival. But they came, 2 men and a woman, all with brown cloaks, thick cords at the waist, and looks that evaluated even the dust hovering in the air. The woman carried a small notebook, one of them a quill, the other only ears. Literally, he didn't speak, only listened. A sound observer. Entered without asking, because asking was already seen as weakness. You stayed in the corner motionless. The sound of wood under feet seemed too loud, but no one commented. They started walking around the house as if looking for proof of a crime you hadn't committed yet. Stopped near the wall where the wind usually hit harder. Waited. The wind came. The wood groaned, the woman noted. Then they approached the pig. He snorted. The man with the quill raised an eyebrow as if he had just heard blasphemy in the form of a grunt. The spoon fell from the plate. By reflex, you lowered your head. The woman noted again. Then what shouldn't happen happened. The pig let out a noise that sounded like a stifled laugh. Yes, you knew it was just a random sound, but the sound observer widened his eyes. It was a clear sign of scorn. Scorn on the part of an animal was at minimum symbolic, and symbolism was a direct path to the sermon, or worse. The group gathered in the middle of the house, whispered. It wasn't for you to hear, but you heard. Restlessness of the environment, irregular noise, light acoustic provocation on the part of the creature, was what they said. You thought about speaking, saying the pig did that always, that it was just a sound, but stayed quiet, because even justifying could be interpreted as narrative manipulation. The woman handed over a parchment, left it on top of the morning's hard bread. It was the report. Residents auditively unstable. Use of moderating chants recommended at dawn, and containment of pig elements after the bell toll. They left without looking back. You remained motionless for longer than you would like to admit. The pig too, by instinct or fear. Hard to say if he felt all that, or just adapted to the silence as a form of defense. At the end of the afternoon, while trying to get firewood, you were stopped on the street. An old man with a hoarse voice and vinegar breath asked why you had stopped chanting the morning prayers, said he heard you silent and that silent was sometimes more offensive than saying the wrong thing. You answered that you hadn't slept well, that your body hurt, that you just wanted silence. He nodded his head and said that was typical. Silence is the sound of resentment, he affirmed, and resentment is the cousin of pride. And pride, well, pride builds the ladder to hell. You didn't answer. Later at dinner, the turnip broth seemed even thinner. Maybe it was punishment, maybe just Monday, but everything indicated that someone in some corner of the village had noted your name on a new list. You lay down earlier but didn't sleep, stayed listening to the wind, trying to guess if it would bring a new rule or just another whisper of accusation. In the Middle Ages, even silence has consequences. You were still sitting, didn't even remember for how long. In the world outside, the wind blew the same. The pig grunts in the same rhythm, and the roof of the house now seemed inclined. Not truly inclined. It was the sensation, as if everything there had started to lean to one side subtly, and when you looked again at the main beam, you saw the crack, a crooked line, thin but very visible. And the problem wasn't the crack itself, it was the shape, with a little imagination, and everyone in the village had too much imagination. It looked like a letter, one of those weird letters from old books, the forbidden ones no one admitted reading, but everyone knew how to describe in detail. You thought about covering it with a cloth, then remembered that covering cracks was now interpreted as hiding marks of the soul, left it quiet, but quiet didn't last long around there. The next day, or maybe the same afternoon, no one knew any more, the rumor ran. A house with symbols on the beams was cursing the village cattle. No one cited names, but everyone looked in your direction. It was when the guy from the parish appeared, not the priest, another one, a liturgical assistant specialized in wooden structures. He introduced himself like that, said his function was to evaluate spiritual interferences in the faithful's physical supports. You didn't understand half, but opened the door. Even so, he entered with a measuring stick and an unlit candle. The candle was to reveal hidden intentions in the flame's reflection. Lit it and began to walk slowly through the house, touching the candle to the corners, as if interrogating the mud. When he arrived at the crack, he stopped. The silence lasted longer than acceptable. Said there was a symbolic imbalance in the upper axis. You asked what that meant. He replied, "It means your house thinks wrong things." Noted something on a parchment, handed over a pamphlet with instructions. Fasting from speech for 2 days. Silence will help the house realign with humility. You nodded your head slowly, so as not to seem sarcastic. On the way out, he said he would return with a blessed carpenter if the crack persisted. Crooked wood, crooked faith. It was the motto of the moment. You spent the rest of the night in silence, not out of obedience, out of exhaustion. Outside, heard someone discussing softly. It was about a donkey that didn't accept the saddle anymore. They were considering exorcism. You closed your eyes and for the first time thought, if the crack in your house wasn't just a crack, maybe it was the only truly honest thing there. The discussion about the donkey didn't end. You still heard the voices even after they moved away. "Demon on the back," was what someone said. "The beast refuses the burden because he is carrying the other invisible one." And no one disagreed. On the contrary, they were already planning a night vigil to observe the animal's eyes. They said if they shined too much, it was a pact. If they shined too little as well. Meanwhile, you forced yourself to the silence imposed by the crack punishment. Couldn't speak, shouldn't write. Laughing then was immediate sentence. The pig seemed not to have received the memo. Grunted, as always, turning the hay in search of an imaginary piece of beet. At every sound you held your breath, because now it wasn't just what you said, it was what happened around you. Your house was suspect, the roof almost a defendant. In the deepest part of the night, heard footsteps. 3, pause, 2 more. The pattern of silent patrols. You leaned against the mud wall, trying to blend in with it. They didn't knock, just left something stuck between the door planks. A pamphlet, another one, but this one was different. Thicker paper, handwriting less shaky. Notice to the community. On the next full moon, spontaneous inspections will be carried out in residences with a history of improper sounds, crooked structures, or volatile faith. Prepare yourself, you read, then burned it. The smoke rose like a signal. Ironically, the village didn't sleep anymore, not because it was active, but because now there existed the fear of what could happen while sleeping. Dreaming was dangerous, they already knew. But now, snoring was too. There was a case of a gentleman expelled from his own house for snort of nasal lust. That's right. Snoring with intensity was associated with desire, and desire, as always, was suspicious. You lay down trying not to touch the roof beam, trying not to stir the hay, trying not to be perceived even by your own pillow. A sack of straw that had seen better days. The fennel candle, the one the inspector left, was almost at the end. The smoke made weird drawings in the air. At a certain moment it formed something that resembled the crack. You closed your eyes, but outside a rooster crowed, too early or too late, hard to say. And someone screamed. The rooster wouldn't lie, followed by another scream more tense, but he sang without light. In the Middle Ages, that was enough to convene a meeting because roosters had spiritual function, and singing in the dark was considered advance warning, either rebellion or both. You didn't go to the square, but heard the bells, always the bells. They didn't announce mass, they announced judgment. They were like the sound of a page turning. Only the page was your life, and the one turning was someone who never saw you, but was certain you deserved less air, less bread, and less explanation. Outside it started to rain, but you knew even rain could be interpreted. If it fell hard, it was divine cleansing. If it fell light, it was a sign that sins were accumulating. In doubt, you closed your eyes and wished that at least this time, no one heard the sound of your pillow being squeezed. The rain didn't last long, but enough for someone to say it was a miracle. Another replied no, that it was a warning. A third suggested that, in doubt, it was better to fast. You didn't even know what rained anymore, water, decree, or insinuation. Spent the morning leaning against the house wall, observing a puddle forming. There was something suspicious in how the water reflected the roof. Distorted, seemed to smile, but only when no one else looked. You blinked. The image returned to normal, preferred to leave. Went to the small space behind the house. There grew a kale seedling, the only one. No one knew it was there, which was already a risk, because hiding vegetables was almost spiritual contraband. The kale, too green, was in a time of expansion, and according to a new pamphlet at the chapel entrance, plants too exuberant were a sign of disguised ambition. You considered pulling it out, but that would be vegetable aggression. And maybe the priest would come to pray against you, so you just looked, thought about apologizing, not to the plant, for existing around it. In the square, someone discussed the color of candles. Now it was forbidden to use more than 2 tones per mass. A man had brought an orange candle and was removed under accusation of liturgical exhibitionism. Orange, according to the new local bishop, was the color that excited the eyes. And excited eyes. Well, sin. You went back home without commenting anything, speaking less than normal, breathing inside. Even the pig understood the mood. On the door, a new notice nailed with wax. Mandatory procession tomorrow. Theme, anticipated atonement of unconfessed guilts. The term anticipated scared you, as if now they punished even the sins you didn't even know you would commit. In the corner of the house, an old clay cup fell by itself. Maybe because of the wind, maybe not, but it fell. You thought about cleaning, then thought about letting one more fall, and saw that without realizing it you were smiling. A small smile, short, but one that would cost dearly if someone saw. In the Middle Ages, smiling for the wrong reasons was as dangerous as bleeding without cause. You wiped the smile with your tunic sleeve and went on with the day, trying not to exist outside the necessary. The next morning, if you could call that morning and not a continuation of the nightmare, started with news. The wind was being investigated. Yes, the wind. They said it had changed direction without warning, which was considered a clear sign of spiritual confusion. And since confusion was forbidden, because God is order, according to the mural in the square, they resolved to identify who had irritated the wind. You, perhaps. Everyone was suspect. A gentleman was called to testify. Had been seen talking alone in the field, and they thought maybe he had provoked the air with words of doubt. You just watched, because intervening is compromising, and compromising was basically writing your own epitaph in fresh mud. In the tavern, the atmosphere was worse, not because of the drink that was now served with supervised blessing, but because the new regulation said cups too full evoked latent gluttony. Result: everyone pretended satiety, drinking from a medieval thimble called the cup of humility. It held exactly 1 drop and a half. The owner of the tavern, tired of getting warnings for excess foam, started serving straight into the hand, said the body heat helped purify the sip. You took your dose. It was more vinegar than wine, but thanked in silence, because complaining now was seen as a symptom of a restless soul. Outside, the group inspecting windows returned. One of them looked at yours, which remained with the cloth tied. Said that was a sign of exemplary spiritual containment, and for the first time in days, you were praised. Did not answer, only moved your head slowly. A calculated movement, enough to seem grateful, but without provoking envy of faith. Later, a pigeon landed on the roof, stayed there still, almost immobile. You thought it beautiful, but beauty was also under suspicion. A lady passing with a basket of roots pointed and murmured, "If it's too quiet, it's listening too much." The phrase didn't make much sense, but there everything was a metaphor, and metaphor in that village was an argument for accusation. You tried to scare the pigeon with a discreet whistle. He flew, but the lady looked at you as if she had seen a pact being signed by a high pitch, didn't say anything, but probably would note something later. Everyone noted everything. Before the sun went down completely, a new notice. Starting tomorrow, all sneezes must be preceded by a warning signal so that neighbors can prepare themselves spiritually. Yes, sneezing now had protocol. You returned home, closed the door carefully, lit a candle, not because you needed light, but because complete darkness was also being investigated. The pig already slept. You lay on the other side of the straw, hugging your sack of hay, like someone hugging an old acquaintance who never judges you. And for a second thought, maybe, just maybe, the crack in the ceiling is the only honest thing in this village. The next morning, or in the same infinite twilight in which you were already trapped, the first sneeze with protocol of the village was heard. An elderly gentleman, the baker from the middle street, raised his arm, looked at the sky and shouted, "Excuse me, spirit of the wheat, I shall sneeze," and sneezed loud, sincere, honest silence. The village became tense for a few seconds until someone applauded, weak applause, with two claps just to not seem like sonic arrogance. You inside your house bit the hard bread from the day before and wondered if this was really progress or just one more chapter of organized madness. What came next was worse. During the collective lunch, also known as the line to get thin broth with a piece of decorative turnip, a woman complained the soup was cold, said in a low tone only to herself, but a boy heard and repeated, "Loud," and then done, new denunciation. Caloric ingratitude, common accusation. Since the council declared that the heat of food depended on the faith of the stomach, the woman was called for a session of sensory re-education, where she had to smell wet firewood and describe what she felt without using sad words. If she said mold, it was negativity. If she said ground, it was rural insolence. She opted for spirit of tired forest and was released with a new pamphlet. 10 ways to warm your soul before broth. You just observed, increasingly convinced that living there was like participating in a play where the script changed every hour and the actors were also judges, extras, and sneeze inspectors. At the end of the afternoon, an old man was seen with his eyes closed for more than 5 minutes. Official motive, improper meditation without ecclesiastical supervision. They said if someone closes their eyes for that long, either they are sleeping without deserving it or trying to leave the body to spy on angels. You wondered how anyone still had energy to spy on, whoever it was, but of course said nothing. The pig was restless, maybe sensed the end of everything, or maybe had just eaten rotten beet. You felt the fatigue, but not just physical. It was the fatigue of carrying days that never start and nights that never end. Everything seemed the same mud, with different names, and the village continued. At every step, a new rule. At every silence, a suspicion. At every drop of rain, a possible final judgment disguised as a leak. You sat down, observed the crack in the ceiling, and for a second thought it looked smaller. It wasn't. It was just you getting used to the absurdity. The wind stopped for a few seconds, which there wasn't relief, it was a threat, because wind too still was a sign of contemplation of the beyond, and contemplating the beyond without supervision was, as you already know, improper invocation of parallel forces. You remained quiet. The fennel candle burned crooked, projecting shadows that seemed to dance. You didn't even bother anymore. Had already accepted that even light was suspicious, especially if it blinked without motive. Light blinking alone, soul wanting to flee or spirit trying to enter. It was never just wind. Outside, a group passed a new chant, something about the 7 sins of the gaze. You weren't even sure if this was a royal decree or just someone testing punitive poetry. The pig slept finally in the same corner, in the same pose, the only constant of your life. And then, like someone realizing they survived unintentionally, you felt it. No one knocked on the door today, no notice, no new pamphlet, no aromatic inspection. The crack remained firm, your window still covered, your soul apparently in place. And that was when you dared. Yes, dared. Closed your eyes, breathed deep and didn't think of anything. Because thinking, as became clear, never helped you much. The candle went out by itself. The hay creaked slowly as if saying, "That's it for today, you don't smile, but you don't groan either. Just accept." Because sometimes surviving a day without a new decree is already more than one could expect, and no one needs to know you dozed off before the prayer. The crack in the ceiling remains there, the pig too. The rest you decide if you want to open your eyes tomorrow. Good night, tired listener, and until next time, sleep with a tired story.